Welcome to DLS's Instructor Training Series. This is the second part of a series on developing listening skills. In this session, we'll talk about activities for authentic sources. By the end of this session, you will be able to describe 3 meaning-focused activities to use with authentic video or audio. You'll also be able to describe how to scaffold, make something easier, or add challenge to each activity. This way you can adjust them for different levels of learners. Let's look first at some of the benefits and reasons for using authentic audio and video. There are several reasons for using authentic video or audio. One is that you may teach a language that has minimal resources, and so you may not really have a textbook to work with. Your student may have requested authentic materials, or you may need to provide exposure to a specific accent. In addition to all of these reasons, authentic video and audio are excellent for providing exposure to real language and providing cultural knowledge and interesting, relevant content for students. So there's a lot of reasons to use authentic video and audio. However, as we know, using authentic audio and video is challenging because often students don't understand everything. It's important to remember here that when we listen in our own language, we also don't understand every word. We really listen for meaning. And when we talk about selecting level appropriate material for students, what we mean is accessible. And let's remember that accessible should equal I plus 1. So that comes from Stephen Krashen, and that's the learner plus 1, so just above the learner's current level. So we want to push them, we want to challenge them a little bit, but where they can still understand most of it. So students should feel challenged, but we don't want them to feel frustrated. If the student has understood every word, then the audio is too easy in that case. The difficulty is that often when students work with authentic materials, they feel discouraged because students want to understand everything. So it's important that when we bring authentic materials in the classroom, we want to help our students feel successful at listening. How do we do that? The most important thing is that we need to create an activity that gives students an achievable comprehension goal. So even if students can't understand everything in the audio, they should be able to complete the activity. And this will give students a feeling of success, that they've understood something, they've done what their teacher asked them to do. A good rule of thumb is that if you have a very difficult audio, you should give the students an easier listening activity. If you have an easier audio, then you can give them a more difficult activity. So now that we know how important activities are, let's look at 3 examples of meaning-focused activities. So in the next section, we're going to look at 3 activities for authentic video or audio. And all of these activities work well with shorter video or audio segments. So something that's between 1 to 5 minutes. And that means it's something that the student can listen to multiple times. Let's begin with the KWL chart. A KWL chart is one of the most versatile comprehension activities that is out there. So KWL stands for know, want to know, and learned. And here's how it works. Before listening or watching the video, so for the pre-listening, the student writes down what they know about the topic. So this is their background knowledge. And then again before listening, they write down what they want to know about the topic. So here, the student will write down 3 questions or 5 questions or however many questions you tell them to. Then, after listening, they'll take notes on what they've learned from the audio. So let's look at an example of how you might use a KWL chart. Let's say you're working with a student who's learning Russian. So here we have a short video. It's 2 to 3 minutes long. It's from CNN. This is a current event, or is at the time of recording. So first of all, you would have the student write down what they know about the topic. So here, you might ask the student these questions to help them think of their background knowledge. So what do you know about Sputnik V? What have you heard? Is it safe? What do you know? And then what can you tell me about COVID-19 in Russia right now? So what do you know about that? So the student will talk a little bit, maybe write it down a few things and share those with you. And then you'll give the student some time to write some questions of what they want to know. So depending on their level, stronger students might write more questions, lower level students might write 1 or 2. So the student here wrote 3 questions, and you can see, is Sputnik V safe? Who can get the vaccine in Russia? Who's eligible for it? And then how effective is Sputnik V? So it's a great idea to have the student write their questions down before listening. This helps them have more focus as they listen, helps them be a more active listener, and it just makes the process easier because they've already got their question down, so now they just have to listen for the answer. So then at this point you would play the video once, maybe twice if the student needs to hear it twice, and then you would have the student tell you what they learned. So here we can see that this student learned that Sputnik V is safe and effective. It says that in the video. Russia has opened their vaccine eligibility, so anyone can get a vaccine. And we also learn in the video that Putin has not yet received the vaccine. So that's an example of how a KWL chart can work. Let's talk about it a little bit. So why start by asking students what they know? We can see that asking students what they know is a great way to activate background knowledge. It gets the student to think about and engage with the topic, and it's also a really good way to recycle vocabulary, and it's very meaning focused. So there are several reasons for doing that. Now, why get the student to write down the questions before they listen? So we talked about this already a bit. Having the student write the questions down is a great way to make them an active listener, and it helps make the listening a bit easier because they can see the questions written down, so they know exactly what they're listening for. And then what if students can't answer their questions after they listen? So we have a couple options here. Students can listen again. Multiple listenings are valuable for a student. Or if the answer isn't in the audio, students can always do independent research and look up the answer outside of class or as homework. Now let's take a look at graphic organizers. So we'll look at an example of a graphic organizer for this video clip from Al Jazeera News. It's about TV, French TV shows. So just to start, let's look at some possible pre-listening activities we might do. So just something really simple, asking the student to make some predictions based on the title, and then giving the student a little bit of content about what the audio will contain, and then asking them if they've seen or heard any of these shows. Once we've done the pre-listening, then we would be ready to listen. And this is the graphic organizer that we can give to students. So the names of the shows are up here, And then we have some specific information we'd like them to listen to, like them to listen for. So the type of show and then why each one is so popular. Here's an example of what the graphic organizer would look like after the student has filled it in and written down the answers. So here you can see that they're just taking notes. They're not writing in complete sentences. And they're capturing some of the information here, but obviously not all of it, which is what we want them to do because we want to give them an achievable listening goal. Now, let's say you have a student who is at a lower level or who's not very good at listening. Then in that case, you can scaffold the task by simplifying the graphic organizer, just having fewer rows and asking them to only listen for one thing. So that's the great thing about a graphic organizer is that if you want to simplify it for a weaker student who needs some encouragement in listening, then just make your graphic organizer really simple and ask them to only listen for one piece of information or maybe two. And the great thing about this is the student can have a clear purpose when they listen, and once they get through the audio and they can fill out, maybe two of these or maybe all three, then they can really have a sense of accomplishment, even though they've actually only understood a little bit. So that's a great way to set an achievable listening goal for a lower level learner. And then, of course, if you have a higher level student who needs or wants more challenge, you can easily provide that with a graphic organizer by just asking them to listen for more information and adding more rows here. So this would be a very high level student who could catch all of this information. They probably need to listen a couple of times, but you can see how easy it is to adapt a graphic organizer for different levels of students. And then if you're teaching a mixed level class, graphic organizers are a great tool because you can give a different one to the different levels of students. So for the lower level student, you only ask them to listen for one or two things. For the higher level student, you ask them to listen for more. And then a great tool here as well is to make sure that you're asking them to listen for different things so that when they share their information after having listened, then they'll be encouraged to listen to the other person because they'll have each listened for different things. So here the lower level student has listened to the type of show and the higher level student has listened for different information. So that's a great way to use graphic organizers if you have a mixed level group class. Now let's look at our third listening activity, a timeline. For this activity, the example text that we'll use, the example audio video, is students will watch this video about the 1979 Iran Revolution, about how it happened. So you can see the title here. This is from Radio Free Europe. And with the timeline, a great idea is to have students listen once and only write down key dates. So depending on your student's level, you might give them a number here. You might say, listen and write down 3 dates that you hear. Or if your student is a higher level, you might say, listen and write down 5 or 6 dates that you hear. And this is a good way to, again, provide an achievable listening goal because the first time students listen, they only have to listen for the dates. Once they've written the dates, students can listen again and write down what happened on those key dates. And so they can fill in their timeline in that way. So a timeline is really easy to adjust if you have a lower level student or a student who's not good at listening. You can make it easier for them by giving them the dates yourself. So you create the initial timeline and the student doesn't have to listen for that. Or you can tell them to only write, 2 or 3 dates or something like that, based obviously on how strong your student is. And then they just have to listen for what happened on those dates. Obviously, if your student is a higher level, you can have them listen for more dates and then write down more information. So timelines work really well for narratives and sequences of events. They're great because if there's an important past event or kind of historical progression in the target region, then a timeline is a really great tool to use for that kind of audio. Audio, of course, that's like this, that's about historical events, tends to be very information packed, really dense. So it's definitely a good idea to scaffold. So you can do that again by giving your students a specific number of dates to listen for, or by writing the dates down in advance yourself, and then having the students fill out what happens on those dates. And like the other activities we looked at, timelines provide excellent support for students to summarize or retell what they have learned. So it leads really directly into a really nice post-listening speaking activity. So to wrap up, let's look at a few do's and don'ts when listening to authentic sources. So let's start with the don'ts. What we don't want to do is to allow word by word translation. So there are a lot of reasons that word by word translation is not ideal. Um, Students don't learn to cope with the challenge of listening. They don't learn to extract meaningful information even when they don't understand everything. And they don't learn how to handle not understanding everything. Also, this is not the way we listen in our first language. We listen to catch overall meaning and to catch details. So we really want to, whenever possible, move students away from listening for word by word, and we want to move them away from translation as well. Unless, of course, they're working on translation. Another thing we don't want to do is to pause the audio after each sentence. So again, this chunks the listening too much. Students don't learn how to cope with things, and this kind of puts them in the pattern of word by word translation. So instead, we want to give students an achievable listening goal where they can listen to a decent amount of the text of the audio and then extract meaning from that. It's also a good idea to just be aware of listener fatigue. So it's easy for students to become tired when listening to authentic audio. So just be aware of that and be ready to switch it up. So sometimes if you're listening to the same chunk of audio more than 2 or 3, maybe 4 times, students can get really fatigued. So again, setting reasonable comprehension goals. If the student just can't understand, helping them out, and then moving on to a post-listening activity. Now, some of the things we do want to do, of course, first and foremost, we want to give students an activity that is going to provide an achievable listening goal for them. So this is really crucial for students at all levels, but especially for our lower level learners or students who are not great at listening, students who may have listening anxiety. We can create an activity that will encourage them and help them to start on that process of extracting meaning even when they don't understand everything. We also always want to do pre-listening and post-listening activities. So pre-listening is so essential for students in getting them ready to listen, helping them think of what they already know about the topic. It's a great way to have a meaningful refresher of important vocabulary, and it's just a really good way to prepare students before diving into that listening. And then it's also a good idea, of course, depending on the level of your student, but a general ballpark figure is to choose audio or video that's within 1 to 5 minutes. If we're listening to something that's longer than that, then it's a good idea to create separate activities and then to do pre and post listening between each section of audio. So you might divide it up maybe within the same class session or perhaps over a week or something like that. Okay, great work. So by now you can describe 3 meaning-focused activities to use with authentic video and audio. Those are the KWL chart, graphic organizer, and timeline. And you can also describe how to differentiate each activity for students at different levels. Thank you so much. And as always, if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to your LTS.